If you go to Mexico City, at some point it's inevitable you'll end up visiting the central plaza of the city, the Zócalo, where the huge flag is, where the cathedral is, where the presidential palace stands. Now, if you walk away from the Zócalo, from that huge central plaza, you walk a couple blocks away, you'll come to a street called La Calle 20 de Noviembre. And on that street is a building that was once the mansion of a very rich man named Don Manuel Solórzano. He was one of the most powerful men in what was then known as New Spain during that colonial period. He was powerful, he was intelligent, he was clever, he knew how to wheel and deal, do business dealings, and so he amassed a lot of wealth, of course, at the expense of the working poor. And he had enough wealth that he could marry whoever he wanted. So he married the most beautiful dama in the entire New Spain as well, according to high society anyway, Doña Marina. They were married, and for a while it was good. For a while he was happy. But you see, he had one major fault, Don Manuel Solórzano. He was a jealous man. He was suspicious, maybe because not all of his own business dealings were entirely honest. And people who are dishonest always suspect that somebody else is trying to pull one over on them. He was suspicious, he was jealous, insanely jealous of any man who looked at his wife. And so at some point when he heard the chisme, he heard the gossip around town that his wife had been cheating on him. When he would go away on business to other parts of New Spain, well, the rumors around Mexico City were that his wife had a lover. That drove him mad. He went insane with jealousy, so he knew he had to do something. Now, when someone is that jealous, they're not thinking clearly. And when you get that jealous and when you get that enraged, well, you're willing to do anything to try to resolve things. So what he did was he went and saw a witch. He met up with a witch, and the witch told him, I can make you an appointment with the bad guy, the devil. You're going to meet him behind the cathedral, back on a back alley. He'll tell you what to do. So Don Manuel Solórzano, he went back to that back alley, stood behind the cathedral, and he said, El Padre Nuestro, he said the Lord's Prayer backwards, just like the witch had told him to. The devil appeared, walked up to him. He didn't have to explain what he wanted. Of course, the devil knew. He said, you want to know who your wife is cheating on you with? Well, I'll tell you how to find out. The devil told him, tonight, you stand out in front of your house, that same house that you can go see in downtown Mexico City on La Calle 20 de Noviembre. The devil told him to go stand out in front of his house, in front of his mansion, and wait until it was exactly 11 o'clock p.m. And he was to ask everyone passing by if they knew the time. And the first man who told him 11 o'clock was the time, well, that would be the man. That would be his wife's lover. And the devil told him, once you find that man, you can do with him whatever you want. It's out of my hands then. So he did. He waited outside in front of his house, and he waited, and every man who passed by, most of the colonial high society people carried pocket watches, and so he would ask them, do you know what time it is? And they would say 10:30, 10:42, 10:50, and eventually a man walked by and told him, son las 11. It's 11 o'clock at night. And Don Manuel Solórzano walked up to the man and looked him in the eye, and he said, Dichoso aquel hombre que sabe la hora de su muerte. He said, a man who knows the hour that he's going to die is very fortunate indeed. And then he pulled out a dagger and he thrust that dagger into the man's belly. The man screamed and fell down in a pool of blood at the front door of Don Manuel Solórzano's mansion. He went inside and he went to bed and he slept the sleep of the dead. He slept like a baby for the first time in a long time. Something was wrong. The next day he woke up and he still had that inquietud. He had that sense that something was wrong. That he felt like he had gotten the wrong guy. He felt that it wasn't his wife's lover, or maybe she had another lover. And so that next night he did the same thing. He asked everyone passing by what time it was, and right when the first man who told him it was 11 o'clock, he told him the same thing. Dichoso aquel hombre que sabe la hora de su muerte. And he buried his dagger into that man's chest. And this became a compulsion for him. Every night he would go out and kill another man at 11 o'clock at night. I was driving him mad, and he knew he couldn't go on like this. I mean, sooner or later, the authorities, they're going to figure out all these bodies keep piling up in front of your house. And so he had to do something, and his conscience, it was eating away at him. He knew he'd made a deal with the devil. He knew he had to look for some kind of redemption. And so he went to what is now the Catedral, the main cathedral there on the side of the Zócalo. And it existed back then too. It goes back to those colonial times. And right next to the entrance to the Catedral, there was the gallows where they would hang criminals. He walked past those gallows, kind of looked up at them, went into the cathedral, and he went to speak with one of the wisest monks in that cathedral. He told him everything. He said, how do I get this stain off of my soul? I need redemption. I need to get this evil off of me. What can I do? So the monk said, what you need to do, you need to pray for the redemption of your soul. Beg for forgiveness. You need to pray. Go kneel at the foot of that gallows tonight, beginning at 11 o'clock, and pray all night. You do that 3 nights. 3 nights in a row. You need to kneel at the foot of the gallows and pray for redemption, forgiveness. He said, I think I got off easy. I didn't even have to pay any penance and nothing. I didn't have to pay any money to the offering. Just 3 nights of prayer. It's pretty good for, a handful of murders. So the first night, he left his house. He put his cloak, wrapped it around so nobody could see who he was. And he went when all the streets were quiet, silent. There was you could only hear the sereno, the man calling out, walking with a lantern, calling out the time. Las 11 sereno. It's 11 o'clock and all is well. So Don Manuel Solórzano, he knelt at the foot of the gallows and he started to pray, and cold wind blew through the Zócalo. He had to wrap his cloak around him. He kept on praying, and it was quiet, just deadly quiet. And then he heard a voice echo throughout the Zócalo, like magnified all around him, like it was inside his own head, this deep spectral voice. And it shouted, Un Padre Nuestro y un Ave María por el alma de Don Manuel Solórzano. Let's have a Lord's Prayer and a Hail Mary for the soul of Don Manuel Solórzano. He was terrified. He was terrified, but he kept at it. He stayed there. All night long, he heard sounds, voices, spectral, ethereal laughter. He was terrified, but he kept praying. When the sun came up, he went home. He looked in the mirror, and his hair had turned white from fright. Now, he didn't tell his wife any of what was going on, of course. How could he? But she knew something was up. The next night, he went back to the foot of the gallows to pray again, and he knelt there, and he was praying, waiting to hear that voice, but he didn't hear it. Silence continued until about midnight. Then a funeral procession was walking through the Zócalo, walking right past him. He looked, he didn't recognize any of the people. They got closer. He saw that all the mourners, they had these hideous faces, grimaces, twisted faces that didn't even look human. He saw these hideous, monstrous faces walking past, and they all had smiles like they were happy about this funeral. They were carrying a casket. It was an open casket, and as the casket came by, he leaned over. He couldn't help himself. He looked, and he saw himself lying in the casket. And those mourners, they just walked back behind the cathedral and disappeared. But he stayed there. So the third night, he saw the monk during the day. He told him, I'm going to pray. I'm going there for this third night. I'll be redeemed, right? Well, nobody knows what happened on that third night. I assume he told the monk about the first 2 nights. That's how we know what happened. But on the third night, he went alone, and he knelt at the foot of the gallows. The next day, they found him hanging by the neck from the gallows. Now, maybe it was just a living person who got revenge. Maybe it was a relative of one of his victims, one of those men that he murdered. Maybe that's who hung him from the gallows. Or maybe it was the devil coming to collect that soul that he had claimed. Or maybe he did find redemption after all. We don't know. But they say that you can go to the Zócalo. You can go to the historic city center of Mexico City today. You can see Don Manuel Solórzano's house. And they say that sometimes you can hear him whispering on the wind, his voice begging for the redemption of his soul. Sometimes you can see his spirit walking the streets. And sometimes you might even hear that spectral voice calling out, Un Padre Nuestro y un Ave María por el alma de Don Manuel Solórzano.